A millionaire tech CEO drops to his knees beside a hospital bed, tears streaming down his weathered face. For 3 long years, he's watched his daughter's legs remain motionless, lifeless. But now, impossibly, she's taking her first trembling steps. Her hand grips his shoulder as she whispers through her own tears, "Dad, I can feel my legs again." This is Richard Blackwood, worth over $800 million, and he's witnessing what every doctor told him was impossible. But let me tell you how a dirty street boy with torn clothes and empty pockets changed everything. This is a story that will shake you to your core and prove that miracles can come from the most unexpected places. Who is this beggar boy? How does a homeless teenager possess knowledge that baffled the world's most expensive doctors? And why did a billionaire who could buy anything kneel before a child who owned nothing? The answer will leave you speechless. 3 years earlier, Richard Blackwood's world shattered in a single moment. He was driving his family home from Emma's dance recital, arguing with his wife Sarah about business deals, when their car skidded off a rain-soaked highway. The impact killed Sarah instantly and left their 16-year-old daughter Emma paralyzed from the waist down. Richard walked away with barely a scratch, carrying guilt that would consume him for years. Emma Blackwood had been destined for greatness. At 16, she was already a competitive dancer with a full scholarship waiting at Juilliard. Her bedroom walls were covered with gold medals and trophies. She could leap through the air like gravity didn't exist, her body a perfect instrument of grace and power. Now that same body sat motionless in a wheelchair. Richard threw everything he had at Emma's recovery. $50 million vanished into experimental treatments. They flew to Switzerland for stem cell therapy. Nobel Prize-winning neurologists examined her case. Cutting-edge robotic rehabilitation systems, electrical stimulation, even controversial procedures in underground clinics. Nothing worked. Nothing even came close. Emma learned to hide her despair behind a brave smile. While her father searched desperately for miracles, she found small moments of joy feeding stray cats from her wheelchair in the hospital garden. She'd given up hope of ever dancing again, but she couldn't bear to crush her father's relentless optimism. But someone was watching Emma. Someone who lived in the shadows of that very hospital. Marcus Chen was 14 years old and invisible to the world. For 8 months he'd been sleeping in hospital corridors, surviving on cafeteria scraps and the kindness of night shift janitors. His parents, David and Liu Chen, had died in a factory fire 2 years earlier. After bouncing between foster homes, Marcus chose the streets over another abusive household. Every day, Marcus watched from the shadows as Richard wheeled Emma through the hospital halls. He studied her condition with the intensity of a medical student. While doctors focused on her spine, Marcus noticed things they missed. The way her left foot twitched slightly when she laughed, how her knee muscles tensed during physical therapy sessions. These weren't random spasms. They were patterns. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Richard emerged from yet another consultation with Dr. Peterson, one of the country's leading neurologists. The verdict was the same as always. Emma's condition was permanent. Richard's face was ashen as he pushed Emma's wheelchair toward the parking garage. 3 years of hope were finally dying. That's when Marcus stepped out of the shadows. His clothes were torn and dirty, his hair unwashed, his sneakers held together with duct tape, but his eyes burned with determination. "Sir," Marcus called out, his young voice echoing in the concrete garage. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Richard stopped cold. He turned slowly, his face twisting from confusion to disgust to pure rage. Here was some street kid, probably high on drugs, making a mockery of his daughter's condition. "Get away from us," Richard snarled, reaching for his phone. "Security! Security!" But Emma grabbed her father's arm. "Wait," she whispered. Something in Marcus's eyes stopped her. Not desperation or madness, but absolute certainty. Marcus stepped closer, unfazed by Richard's fury. "I've been watching Emma for 8 months. I know her condition better than any doctor in this hospital. Her injury isn't what they think it is." "You're insane," Richard spat. "Do you know how much money I've spent? How many specialists have examined her? Get out of here before I have you arrested." Her left foot moves 2.3 seconds after she experiences strong emotions, Marcus continued calmly. Her quadriceps contract during REM sleep cycles. Her spinal fluid shows inflammation patterns that suggest incomplete injury. The doctors are treating her for complete paralysis, but she has a partial injury that's being masked by swelling. Richard froze. Those details weren't in any public medical records. How could this boy know things that teams of doctors had missed? Emma leaned forward in her wheelchair. How do you know all of this? Marcus knelt down to her eye level. Because I've been studying you. Not your money, not your fame, just you. And I can help you walk again, but I need 24 hours. 24 hours of what? Richard demanded. Of working with Emma, supervised, monitored, whatever you want. But I need time to show you what the doctors are missing. Richard's mind reeled. Every logical part of his brain screamed that this was impossible. A homeless teenager couldn't solve what Nobel Prize winners couldn't. But Emma was looking at Marcus with something Richard hadn't seen in 3 years, hope. Dad, Emma said softly, I have nothing left to lose. Welcome to Mirror Stories. We bring you stories that reflect our actions. Hit that subscribe button now, because this story is about to take turns that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about miracles. What would you do? Would you trust a homeless boy who claims he can heal your daughter? Or would you walk away from what might be your last chance at hope? Let me know in the comments, because Richard Blackwood was about to make the most important decision of his life, and what happened next would change everything. Against every instinct screaming in his head, Richard Blackwood made a decision that would either save his daughter or destroy what was left of his sanity. He agreed to give Marcus Chen 24 hours, but the hospital staff had other plans. The moment Marcus stepped into the rehabilitation wing, nurses whispered among themselves. Security guards followed his every move. Dr. Peterson pulled Richard aside, his face red with anger. You cannot be serious about letting this street rat near your daughter, Peterson hissed. This boy is probably diseased, definitely mentally unstable, and absolutely dangerous. Marcus overheard every word. While Richard argued with the medical team, Marcus sat alone in the corner, his stomach growling. The cafeteria staff refused to serve him. Nurses walked past him like he was invisible. A security guard kicked him awake when he dozed off in a chair, telling him homeless people weren't allowed to sleep in the hospital. But Marcus endured it all, because Emma was watching. When the arguing finally stopped, Marcus approached Emma's wheelchair with quiet determination. While Richard and a team of nurses watched suspiciously, Marcus knelt beside Emma and began the most unconventional physical therapy session anyone had ever witnessed. Instead of the sterile clinical approaches Emma was used to, Marcus used his hands to trace gentle patterns along her legs. He talked to her constantly, asking her to describe exactly what she felt. No matter how small. Close your eyes, Marcus whispered. Tell me if you feel anything when I do this. He pressed specific points along her spine, points that no doctor had ever touched. Emma's breathing changed almost immediately. I feel something, she gasped. It's like a warm tingling. The nurses scoffed. Phantom sensations, one muttered. Completely normal in paralysis cases. But Marcus smiled. He moved to her left leg, applying pressure to her knee in a precise pattern. Emma's eyes flew open. My knee, she breathed. I can feel my knee. I can feel my knee, she repeated. For the first time in 3 years, Emma felt genuine sensation below her waist. Not phantom pain or imagined tingles, but real, undeniable feeling. Tears streamed down her face as Marcus continued his work. Richard watched in stunned silence as his daughter experienced something every specialist had told him was impossible. The boy's hands moved with precision that seemed almost surgical. He wasn't guessing. He knew exactly what he was doing. But even as hope began to bloom, Marcus was hiding something that would change everything. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He walked the hospital corridors trying to process what he'd witnessed. That's when he discovered the truth about Marcus's living situation. In a forgotten corner of the hospital basement, behind a broken vending machine, Richard found Marcus's home. A nest of cardboard boxes, a few stolen hospital blankets, and a collection of medical journals that Marcus had somehow acquired. The boy had been living like this for 8 months, studying Emma's condition while the world ignored his existence. How long have you been down here? Richard asked softly. finding Marcus curled up in the makeshift shelter. Marcus startled awake, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry, I'll leave. I just needed somewhere warm." "No," Richard said, sitting down beside him. "I'm not here to kick you out. I want to understand. Why, Emma? Why have you dedicated 8 months of your life to helping a stranger?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a faded photograph, its edges worn from constant handling. "These were my parents," he said, handing Richard the picture. Richard studied the image of an Asian man and woman in medical scrubs, their arms around a much younger Marcus. They looked happy, proud, alive. "David and Liu Chen," Marcus continued. "They were physical therapists at this hospital." Richard's blood went cold. That name was familiar, too familiar. "They treated Emma," Marcus whispered. "Right after her accident, when she first arrived, they spent weeks with her, developing a specialized treatment plan. They believed her paralysis wasn't permanent." The photograph trembled in Richard's hands. He remembered the Chen couple now. They had been so optimistic about Emma's recovery, so different from the other doctors who spoke only of adaptation and acceptance. "They died 2 years ago," Marcus continued, his voice breaking. "There was a fire at the textile factory where they volunteered on weekends treating injured workers. 37 people died, including my parents." Richard felt the world spinning around him. But their research, their treatment plan for Emma, died with them. All their files, all their work, everything was destroyed in the fire. Except, Marcus tapped his temple. "I memorized everything. Every conversation, every technique, every theory they had about spinal cord injuries. I was planning to become a doctor like them someday." "So you've been living here, studying Emma because she was my parents' last case, their most promising patient. They believed they could help her walk again, and they died before they could prove it." Richard stared at this 14-year-old boy who had carried the weight of his dead parents' dreams for 2 years. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "Because I knew once Emma walks again, I won't need to be here anymore. I'll finally be able to join my parents." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I've been planning it for months," Marcus said with devastating calm. "Once I prove my parents were right, once Emma takes her first steps, I'll have completed their work. Then I can be with them again." Richard felt his heart breaking for this child who had lost everything but was using his final days to give hope to others. "Marcus, you're talking about suicide." "I'm talking about going home," Marcus replied. "I've been alone for 2 years. My parents are waiting for me." At that moment, Emma's voice echoed from upstairs. She was calling for Marcus, excited about new sensations she was feeling in her legs. Richard looked at this broken boy who had become his daughter's miracle and realized he wasn't just fighting to save Emma anymore. He was fighting to save Marcus too. The next morning, when Richard told Emma about Marcus's parents and his devastating plan, she broke down completely. Here was a boy who had lost everything: parents, home, future, and instead of becoming bitter, he had chosen to spend his last days giving her hope. "He's using his final weeks to help me walk again," Emma sobbed. "How is someone so young so selfless?" Richard saw something he hadn't recognized before. Marcus wasn't just Emma's healer, he was the son Richard never had. Both of them were broken by tragedy, but while Richard had chosen isolation and guilt, Marcus had chosen sacrifice and love. Can you believe the strength of this 14-year-old boy? While most kids his age worry about homework and video games, Marcus Chen was carrying the weight of scientific discovery and planning his own death, all while living in cardboard boxes and being treated like garbage by everyone around him. But Emma wasn't going to let him give up. Neither was Richard. If you think this story is powerful so far, make sure you subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in the human spirit and prove that sometimes the most broken people can create the most beautiful miracles. When Richard and Emma knew the truth about Marcus's parents and his heartbreaking plan, everything changed. Richard wasn't just fighting to save his daughter anymore. He was fighting to save the boy who had become like a son to him. "Show me exactly what your parents discovered," Richard demanded, his voice thick with emotion. "Show me everything." Marcus wiped his tears and pulled out a worn notebook. the only thing he had left of his parents. Inside were detailed sketches, measurements, and observations written in a child's handwriting as he desperately tried to preserve his parents' work. Most people think Emma's spinal cord is completely severed, Marcus explained, his voice gaining strength. But my parents discovered something the other doctors missed. Her injury isn't complete. There's a 2 mm gap where nerve fibers are still partially connected. He showed Richard detailed drawings of spinal anatomy that would impress medical students. The problem isn't that the connection is gone. It's that inflammation and scar tissue are blocking the signals. If you can reduce the inflammation and stimulate the remaining nerve pathways in exactly the right sequence, the connection can be re-established. Richard breathed, finally understanding. Marcus nodded. My parents developed a technique using specific pressure points combined with electrical stimulation, but not the expensive machines doctors use. Simple household items that create precise microcurrents. Richard stared at the notebook in amazement. This wasn't magic or false hope. This was brilliant, groundbreaking science that had been lost in a factory fire. Why didn't other doctors see this? Because they were looking at scans and treating Emma like a textbook case, Marcus replied. My parents spent hours with her, mapping every muscle response, every nerve reaction. They treated her like a person, not a diagnosis. Dr. Peterson and his team had been listening from the doorway, their skepticism gradually turning to amazement. As Marcus explained the scientific basis for his methods, medical professionals who had dismissed him as a crazy street kid began documenting every word. This is revolutionary, Dr. Peterson whispered. If this technique works, it will work, Marcus said with quiet confidence, because my parents were never wrong. The next morning, the hospital's rehabilitation room looked like a scene from a science fiction movie, but with the most unusual equipment anyone had ever seen. Marcus had assembled his treatment apparatus using items from around the hospital: copper wires, small batteries, specific metal objects that could conduct precise electrical currents. Emma lay on the treatment table, her face a mixture of hope and terror. 3 years of failed treatments had taught her to guard her heart against disappointment. But something about Marcus's calm confidence made her believe that this time might be different. Remember, Marcus said softly, positioning his hands at specific points along Emma's spine, this isn't about forcing your body to work. It's about reminding it how to work. He began the treatment exactly as his parents had taught him. Gentle pressure combined with microelectrical stimulation, applied in patterns that seemed almost like a dance. Richard held his breath as Marcus worked, praying to a God he'd almost stopped believing in. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, so subtly that everyone almost missed it, Emma's left calf muscle twitched. The room went completely silent. Did you see that? Dr. Peterson whispered. Marcus smiled. Emma, try to move your toe. Emma closed her eyes, concentrating with every fiber of her being. For 3 years, she had sent these same mental commands to her legs with no response. But this time, impossibly, her big toe moved. Just a tiny movement, barely visible, but it was there. Richard collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Emma stared at her toe in shock, tears streaming down her face. I moved it, she whispered. I actually moved it. But Marcus wasn't finished. For the next hour, he continued the treatment with the precision of a master surgeon. Gradually, Emma regained control of her toes, then her foot, then her ankle. Try to bend your knee, Marcus instructed. Emma focused all her energy, and slowly, incredibly, her knee bent. The medical team stood in stunned silence, witnessing something they had believed was impossible. Dr. Peterson was frantically taking notes, realizing he was watching medical history being made by a homeless teenager. But the most incredible moment was yet to come. Emma, Marcus said, his voice trembling with emotion, I think you're ready to stand. Richard moved to one side of Emma, Marcus to the other. Together they helped her swing her legs over the side of the treatment table. For the first time in 3 years, Emma's feet touched the floor. I can feel the ground, she gasped. I can actually feel the cold floor. Supporting her weight between them, Richard and Marcus slowly helped Emma rise to her feet. Her legs shook uncontrollably, muscles that hadn't worked in years suddenly coming back to life. I'm standing, Emma sobbed. Dad, I'm standing, but Marcus had one more miracle to give her. Take a step, he whispered. With Richard and Marcus supporting her, Emma lifted her right foot and took one shaky step forward, then another, then a third before her legs gave out and she collapsed into their arms, laughing and crying at the same time. You did it, Richard whispered to Marcus through his own tears. You brought her back. In that moment, Richard Blackwood made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Marcus Chen, he said, his voice formal despite his tears, you gave me back my daughter. Now I want to give you a family. I'm adopting you. Today, right now. Marcus stared at him in shock. What? You said you wanted to join your parents, Richard continued, but I think they sent you to us for a different reason. Not to die, but to live, to continue their work, to be part of our family. Marcus broke down completely, years of grief and loneliness pouring out of him. He had spent so long planning his death that he had forgotten how to plan for life. Your parents' work isn't lost, Richard said, pulling Marcus into a fierce hug. It's just beginning, and you're going to help us share it with the world. 6 months later, if you had visited the Blackwood Medical Research Foundation, you would have witnessed miracles happening every day. Emma Blackwood stood in a bright dance studio, but she wasn't performing for judges or competitions anymore. She was teaching children in wheelchairs, showing them that movement was still possible, that hope was never lost. Her students adored her because she understood their struggles in a way no able-bodied teacher ever could. In the research wing of the building, Marcus Chen worked alongside the world's leading neurologists, developing and refining his parents' techniques. Gone were the torn clothes and hungry nights. Now he wore a school uniform and had his own laboratory, but his dedication to helping others remained unchanged. Richard Blackwood had transformed from an isolated millionaire consumed by guilt into a passionate advocate for homeless youth and medical research. The Blackwood Foundation had already helped dozens of paralyzed patients take their first steps, and Marcus's techniques were being studied in hospitals worldwide. But perhaps the most beautiful moment came when Marcus, now 15 and healthy, approached a new patient, a young girl whose family had been told she would never walk again. Hi, Marcus said softly, kneeling beside her wheelchair. My name is Marcus, and I can help you walk again. The girl's parents looked skeptical, just as Richard once had. They saw a teenager making impossible promises. But the girl looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something her doctors had never shown her, absolute certainty that miracles were possible. This story proves that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from the most broken places, that a homeless boy with nothing could give everything to a family that seemed to have it all, and that when we choose to lift each other up, instead of letting tragedy tear us down, we can create miracles that change the world. What's the most incredible act of selflessness you've ever witnessed? Share it in the comments below. Because stories like Marcus's remind us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear torn shoes and carry hope in their hearts. If this story moved you the way it moved others, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to believe in miracles again. Because in a world that often feels broken, we all need reminders that healing is possible, that love conquers tragedy, and that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything.